So I've called this talk Loosening Identity, the Subject in Contemporary Painting. The challenge, artists trying to make socio-environmental paintings in the 21st century face a number of challenges. We are generally aware that aspects of our shared existence are in crisis and that remedial action needs to be taken to address issues like climate change, rampant capitalism, poverty, and environmental degradation. So the 20th century saw the commodification of art in terms of modernist and postmodernist manifestations. Sometimes political interests interfered, as in the CIA's direct promotion of abstract expressionism as part of their Cold War strategy to establish American abstraction as the preeminent expression of the so-called free world. Marxist and socialist thought became the preserve of the intelligentsia at universities. Thus, much of conceptualism is rooted in thinking about social order. This has given rise to an anomaly where artists might be creating works as social commentary, but can only reach an audience through a commercial system of monetary exchange. Auction houses define the value of art, and they have no interest in ideas. So universities establish the critical debate and outline the narrative trajectory of art. Trends like relational aesthetics, where artists engage with the public through providing useful public services like a pop-up library, are an example. Painting becomes an anachronistic practice and is devalued, leading to the ridiculous assertion that painting is dead. It was also seen historically as elitist. In my opinion, painting does need to reinvent itself, but because we think in pictures, it is a biological manifestation and it's inherently valuable. Now, capitalism works by creating shortages, thereby accruing value to products. And universities do a similar thing by limiting access to the system while validating theories. So for many viewers, some of my paintings present a challenge because they transgress cultural norms and present sexual scenarios that bring to mind aspects like bestiality. I'm talking about these paintings here. Religious and social conditioning has initiated many taboos. Humans see themselves as separate from animals by virtue of consciousness and sentience. They imagine a teleological process leading towards perfection or salvation. Theories of evolution share this myth with faith-based initiatives. So my primal paintings present bizarre narratives with hybridized animal and human components so as to provoke thought. They are tragicomic in that they deal with life and death or existential issues, but with humor. Empathy. I'm concerned with redressing the balance between animals and humans to build empathy. Consequently, I explore the origins of our way of conceptualizing humans and animals. This leads to Cartesian logic and the mechanical metaphor. And Descartes' famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," provokes me to ask, what is consciousness? Do we think? And where does the self come from? There are a lot of assumptions underlying our cultural beliefs. So what is the true nature of reality and individuality? And how do animals fit into this scenario? René Descartes, a mathematician philosopher from the 17th century in the age of the Enlightenment, developed some theories that still act as the foundation for modern Western culture. His concept of analytical geometry suggested that space and spatial relations could be measured. Quantities that could not be measured exactly would fit into the system if new symbols were created for them. The principle that the world of natural phenomena could be understood through number and measurement became basic scientific procedure. And Cartesian logic, which plays such a large part in the human's conception of the self, thus gave birth to scientific method. His idea was to remove all doubt from scientific method, so it was founded on empirical observation alone. This way of thinking is referred to now as reductivism. I think, therefore I am. Descartes' proof of existence began his quest for truth. However, locked within this perception is also the idea that humans are somehow unique and separate from other animals in the respect that it can think. Descartes saw this ability as God-given. Going further, he described the workings of the human body in mechanical terms. The brain is perceived to be of substantive matter, but the mind is considered to be immaterial. Thus, the mind activates the brain, which causes the body to act like a machine. And he considered the nexus of this interaction to be the pineal gland, situated in the center of the skull. This was because to him it looked like it wasn't bilateral, it was like a unified gland. So he also regarded some ideas as innate to humanity, like the idea of free will. This emanated from God and therefore must be true. Thus he created the perception that the mind is somewhat independent from the body-brain and in control of it. It was immaterial and linked to God. He also considered animals to be devoid of feeling and thought. Humans have language, which animals lacked, implying that they lacked reason. Only beings endowed with a mind and a soul are rational. Thus animals could not have a soul. They cannot experience hunger, thirst, or pain, but produce squeals of pain merely as a mechanical response. He also influenced our concept of consciousness and unconsciousness when he asked, what then am I? A thing that thinks. What is a thing that thinks? It's a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, but also imagines and feels. So consciousness is preeminent in this perception, but Descartes also notes involuntary bodily movements like passions that are not accounted for by conscious thought. This led to the concept of the unconscious, which came to be considered as a separate compartment of the brain. So his perceptions, they underpin our culture, and they have done for years, and they remain the dominant common way of conceptualizing the relationship between mind and body. And even our current myth that sees the mind as a software program is influenced by this separation of mind and brain. Art as a mechanical metaphor. Art is a process of creation where we imagine the mind stimulating the brain to create an art object. Consciousness is seen as the source of creative production. Art also partakes in the mechanical metaphor by dividing its functions into sections like painting, sculpture, ceramics, aesthetics. We structure our art institutions to mimic the hierarchy of the mind-body perception. Theoretical and stylistic divisions like conceptualism or minimalism are yet another way in which the mechanical model dominates our perceptions. Dividing the human being into constituent compartments has the effect of stripping the organism of its body, brain, mind, environmental unity, and choosing conscious awareness as the determining characteristic of the human mind means that interpretation is always going to be limited. Descartes had made an assumption that behind the thought there must be a thinker. And Antonio Damasio is a neurologist who wrote a book called Descartes' Error, which seeks to demonstrate how reason and feeling are intimately bound up with the brain and body. He says, the comprehensive understanding of the human mind requires an organismic perspective, that not only must the mind move from a non-physical cogitum to the realm of biological tissue, but it must also be related to the whole organism, possessed of integrated body proper and brain, and fully interactive with the physical and social environment. So he's actually a really intelligent neuroscientist, and his books are quite hard reading because he's experimenting and working out how the mind works. So his first book that I read was called Descartes' Error, specifically trying to show that the body is something that derives, the body and mind and brain are all actually interlinked. That's essentially what it is. But he goes further, and his later book is titled Self Comes to Mind, and considers how we create our own conscious minds. So he considers like not just eyes and ears and things, but also skin as an organ. So we're constantly feeling our bodies. So a process of mapping takes place as our body relays information to the brain. The body state is continually mapped in the brain, and they are in dialogue with one another. The brain can also simulate body states as if they were occurring. Thus, we can project the body state that some other person could be in. So, quoting from him, consciousness is the result of adding a self-function to mind that orientates the mental contents to one's needs and thus produces subjectivity. The self-function is not some know-all homunculus, but rather an emergence within the virtual screening process we call mind of yet another virtual element, an image protagonist of our mental events. So he says, I see the neurology of consciousness as organized around the brain structures involved in generating the lead triad of wakefulness, mind, and self. Three major anatomical divisions, the brain stem, the thalamus, and the cerebral cortex, are principally involved. But one must caution that there are no direct alignments between each anatomical division and each component of the triad. All three divisions contribute to some aspects of wakefulness, mind, and self. So it's almost like there's a loop-back mechanism, and he sees the brain stem as actually being maybe a more ancient body part that is, it doesn't talk to the cerebral cortex that well. So the thalamus, he thinks, is what somehow makes them relate to each other. So of animals, he says, if a species has behaviors that are best explained by a brain with mind processes rather than by a reflex brain with mere dispositions for action, such as reflexes, if the brain has components to make conscious minds in humans, then that species is conscious and language is not required. So that was one of Descartes' ideas, was that because we have language, we were in some way, we were more connected and to consciousness, and that is why he thought animals did not have sentience and consciousness. So there's a scientist, Rupert Sheldrake, who I think they probably see him as a pseudo-scientist more than a scientist, but he generated the idea of morphic resonance, which I don't think can actually be proved, but it refers to the mind of a species or the memory, which is in some mysterious way dictates the actions of individuals in the entire species. Thus, skills learned by one group of birds suddenly appear in that same species on other continents. Like in this particular example, it was they learned how to open milk bottles. So what he's really interested in is thinking that there might be some process of telepathy within a species. So it's maybe can be seen as a communication that is not necessarily through the conscious mind, more something that is sort of endemic within a species. So Newtonian reality. Our concept of reality is locked upon the Newtonian idea of space, object, and time. And we continue to use this system because it seems to be objective reality. We observe objects in space and absorb interpretations of the data. Unfortunately, that's not really what is happening. We're actually projecting interpretations onto phenomena, and consciousness functions more as a censoring device. It delimits our possibilities. We see what we want to see or are programmed to see. To some extent, like consciousness is working in concert with the unconscious. So it is bringing things out, but at the same time, it is limiting the way we see things. So the particle wave duality, quantum theorists made astounding assertions about reality being both a particle and a wave, with the subjectivity of the observer predicting the outcome. So a recent experiment has finally produced an image of light, which is a particle and a wave simultaneously. So it sort of builds upon the idea that space is actually not empty. There's like a resonance, or there are waves in space, which of course we can't see, but it's possibly because our consciousness does not permit us to see the evidence of what might make that sort of thing more visible. It points up a deficit in our cultural language, that we cannot accommodate ambiguity and contradiction. Things are exclusive as black or white, yes or no, never inconclusive. It's interesting that we seem to be able to comprehend the quantum view of reality, but continue to conduct our lives according to Newtonian constants. So I think one of the challenges of the 21st century is try to permit a new awareness of reality and to work out a way of thinking in that mode. So it can be demonstrated that our perception of the world is created within us. And Gregory Bates, in his book Mind and Nature, A Necessary Unity, explores the meaning of some perceptual experiments he undergoes with Dr. Ames. He deduces that the processes of perception are inaccessible to us. The machinery of perception created the image in accordance with the rules of parallax, rules that were for the first time clearly verbalized by painters in the Renaissance. And this whole process, the creating of the image with its built-in conclusions from the clues of parallax, happened quite outside my consciousness. So the rules of the universe that we think we know are buried deep within our processes of perception. So it would seem logical to me that art is a biological expression of the body-mind complex. And we tend to see that form as art because it's part of our matrix of seeing. Other animals will also possess the energy to project a matrix of seeing to satisfy their ends. So to claim human superiority because of manifestations like reason and art is extremely arrogant. It's to ignore the strong forces which surge through life in subliminal form and for which we have no language. The shape that our culture takes is informed by the same energies that compel small fish to swim in a formation that creates the illusion of a larger fish. So as an artist trying to communicate meaning through narrative strategies, I'm mused about the nature of reality and perception. And coming from South Africa, I noticed that Bushman cave art and ritual ceremonies seem to incorporate the spirit world alongside their experience of hunting and survival. So when drawing in caves, they're evoking this world, and their lines are magical transporters of conceptual direction. As a community, the concept of individuality is not functional for this group. Africans are traditionally pastoralists, so Bushmen as hunter-gatherers are seen historically as a threat to livestock. The colonists and the African pastoralists basically hunted them over many years, from the sort of 16th, 17th century onward. So they pushed them further and further into the desert regions. So small groups of Bushmen survive in these regions where they continue to hunt antelope, sometimes carrying kills back to camp over 3 days. They have an interesting concept of the power possessed by animals. It's called Num, and is an energy that can be beneficial or destructive to humanity if not channeled. So they perform the trance dance, which is a healing ritual around the fire at night. The women sit in a circle and clap intricate rhythms of wordless songs that are named after strong things like the eland or gemsbok antelope. The men dance in a line within the circle and then alternate the vortices by changing direction. And spirit animals are attracted to the dance site. The dancers describe a boiling in their stomachs and begin to see pathways of light that lead to the spirit world. At a point, some go into a trance that enables them to blend with the spirit world and in certain cases become spirit animals. And this allows them to transcend physical barriers and become shamans. These healers seek the sickness in other individuals and draw it out through sites like the belly button. And finally they collapse exhausted, and then the rest of the group coax them back to life through song and stroking. So it's a very, very communal thing. So cultures like the Bushmen of the Kalahari or the Australian Aborigines have no problem reconciling alternate versions of reality. They see experiential reality as part of an overall dream time or spirit world. And one of the features of this way of thinking is to see the animals and environment as part of self and vice versa. So, to get to my point is the reason we need to develop a new way of seeing. And the reason to develop a new way of seeing is to alter our effect on the environment. So instead of seeing a tree, we need to see the larger organism, and we need to relinquish boundaries so that the environment merges with self. So the Bushmen provide an example of a culture that achieves this. And it seems to me that the Western notion of the individual is really just a paradigm, and that creative endeavor could reinvent the persona and by extension, the society. If the environment were contained within the idea of the self, perhaps we could pay more attention to it and devise better structures of governance. So, if people would like to take a short break, and then I'll discuss my paintings in the next section.